Hello, Trouties, and welcome to another week with Facebook Live Friday. I think I finally got the words right on that. It's amazing. I thank you for joining me live here today. If you're not live, I thank you for watching. If you know what, I'm going to reposition a little bit. We have an ugly shot going on there. It's like an empty shell. If you have been here before, you know what's going on. If not, I am Sierra Bailey. I am the maker, designer, everythinger here at Manic Trout. And on Fridays, I go live on Facebook where I share style and fashion tips, talk about the jewelry, and I think what most of your favorite parts are, I give a little behind the scenes and I talk about the brand and about building the business and what life is like as a designer. So today, I gave a little sneak peek about this on Instagram. I'm not sure how many of you saw that. Today, I'm going to talk about the most asked question that I get, and that is where I find inspiration for my designs. I have been designing professionally for 15 years, and I've been making jewelry for 25. That's a lot of jewelry. It's pretty easy to come up with a couple of collections or a couple of pieces, but to design collection after collection after collection, that gets a little taxing on the creative flow sometimes. So I'm going to talk about that today. But before I do, I have a special guest for a moment of somebody that has been dying to come in and say hello on a Facebook Live Friday. So come on in, special guest. Introduce yourself. A little faster.
Oh my goodness. Hello, Facebook Live world. I am Adam. I am Sierra's husband.
This is Mr. Trouty.
I am Mr. Trouty, yes.
So, I have been married to Adam for about 5 years, so about a quarter of what Manic Trout has been going on. And Adam has seen me think of, design, and release a lot of collections at this time. It was actually after we met and got married that I started designing collections and doing seasons 4 times a year. Before that, I was a little more throwing things out there, but I really started to get focused on that I think like 4 years ago. So Adam kind of popped in to say hello to you all and because he wanted to be included on the fun. But also because I said to Adam, do you notice when we're together and places, like can you tell when I'm inspired by something? And so we're going to pose that question. Adam, when we go places, like, where do you see that I get inspired?
We do. Sometimes around town. I don't recognize that as much as I do, like, if we go to the beach or if we go on vacation somewhere, or Sierra uses these huge expression boards around our home or other people's art. It's pretty fascinating to watch you find your creativity and your inspiration, actually. You do. You get hyper-focused on it, and you will... I kind of get drowned out by your inspiration, but it's amazing to watch your process.
And that's really kind of interesting feedback because when we were talking about this before we went live, I was like, can you tell when I'm inspired? Like, I don't, as a person who creates, I don't really think about it that often because at this point I have been creating art or designing things for my entire life. So it's not like a conscious thing anymore. So then I started thinking about it. I'm like, is it obvious to people? And apparently it is. So that was kind of interesting to learn about that too. But what Adam brought up is a great point. Do you want to be done? Do you want to leave? Are you enjoying yourself?
No, I'm totally into this still. I was also going to say it's fun to watch because actually at the beginning of inspiration, you are more quiet. And then towards the end, you get really excited when it starts to come together. It is more noticeable when it's starting to come together.
And that's what I kind of have been really enjoying through the years of Pinterest and things like that, because you can see that in other designers, even online. Like, you can tell when somebody's designing because Pinterest makes it now that somebody will like start filling up a board and you're like, ooh, they're onto something. Like, something is sparking in their brain right now. And I love that about kind of the online version. And I'm going to kind of take you through a quick what I do when I'm getting ready to design a new collection. I design quarterly collections. Hey, my dad just joined. Hey, Dad. I design quarterly collections, and I design them usually about 6 months ahead of the season. So right now, I'm in the middle of designing fall. So you can't really feel what you'd want to wear or things like that because you're so out of whack of what's actually going on. But I like to go more kind of, I don't like to look at fashion, because you can sometimes get accidentally too inspired by somebody and copy them, and you don't want to do that. So I actually very little look at fashion until I'm looking at like what is kind of coming out as I'm releasing at the same time to make sure I'm on par. But I don't look at like the projected things that people are designing far in advance because I'm terrified that I'll copy them. I look more like I love it when we go to the beach. I love it when we go to cool gardens and flowers. Adam is a great green thumb and we have lush garden things, mostly leafy things, which is why I think leaves are so big in my mind around the house. I am a big fan of using things like Pinterest to gather these things, because when I get on themes, I like want to read about it, I want to look at things about it, and I really get immersed. So I may be, let's say, at a museum, and I may see something and say, oh, look at that painting, which you can take pictures in museums with your phone. And I'll say, oh, look at that painting, and it uses, that color and that, and then I go home and then I look up that artist, and then I become obsessed with that artist, and then I read all about that artist, and maybe buy a book about that artist, and then maybe pin a lot of things about that artist. I kind of wanted to show you this really quick. So like when I was in high school, I was encouraged to start things like this. So they're mostly words. This is a really lame thing. But we would draw on things like that kind of to get thoughts out. As I progressed, I started to, and got older, I started to like cut things out of magazines and things like that. So that was like the first way that I started gathering. Now, we are all very lucky that we have Pinterest in our lives, and I have an example to show you, and you can, of course, look up Manic Chart on Pinterest. But now, I do things like, it's a horrible shot. I have, like, let's say this board that I did of icebergs. They were so on my mind before a collection. The collection that I released ended up with things that look like this. So look at how much those actually look. You can see, obviously, like where the icebergs came from. The sea glass collection I just did. First, I was obsessed with sea glass and finding it and collecting it, and then I kind of went on from there. But the sea glass itself was not the only thing that was inspiring me. The colors were really inspiring me, and those were not coming from sea glass. Those were coming from flowers and nature and the combinations that would happen that you wouldn't necessarily put together. So, when finding inspiration, it's not all about that initial spark, because the spark is what starts it all, but it's about the fire that creates the spark. So if you're inspired by something, it could be anything, but it's where you kind of take it that I found really pushes the most for creativity, because that's what gets like, I'm quiet when I'm kind of like thinking about all the sparks and the embers, and then I get excited when I start collecting the sparks and like building on them and making them bigger. And that's really the biggest part about inspiration that artists don't talk about. When people are like, what inspires you? And it's like, oh, pretty things, nature, it's hard to put a thing on it. Inspiration comes from anywhere, but like the key is building on inspiration and knowing like, oh, if I'm really inspired by this rose that's growing in the garden, it won't end up being the rose that is really the inspiration, but it will probably be my researching roses or my researching like gardens in Central Texas in May that end up, all the colors come out and things like that. So that's a really important part of like the inspiration process that works for me. It's like the research phase, if you will, which for art and design is, if you watch documentaries about fashion designers, like there's a great Isaac Mizrahi one that's years old, and he talks about like Nanook of the North. Which, P.S., whenever anybody talks about that movie, I still think about Isaac Mizrahi. But, that film was so inspirational to him, but it wasn't, he didn't like directly go on it, but it wasn't just that. He then kind of got into that genre, and that's what was inspiring. So you have to keep in mind that inspiration is kind of the spark that gets the creative flow going on, because...
Oh, I'm going to get out of here,
flow is the most
you
important
inspire
thing.
me every day. So
oh, thanks, babe. Bye. So that is kind of what I wanted to really talk about with inspiration. And, that spark, like I said, comes from a lot of things. I was getting my hair cut a couple of hours ago, which doesn't she do a lovely job? And there were hanging light fixtures behind me that I was telling her about what the video would be. And Becky, and I said, it's not that I am directly inspired by what you would think. And I was like, for example, that light fixture behind me is amazing. And then I really started looking at the light fixture, and I was like, that is really cool, which made me think, oh, I want to go home and look up light fixtures that look like that. Or maybe I want to go home and look at glass patterns that are like that. And that right there, that I think now will, as the fall collection continues to come out, end up being like a course that I go on, because it started from that spark. So like I said, wanted to talk about that today. It's kind of a cool way to be able to share a behind the scenes look into the design process and the creative process. I also wanted to point out that one of the biggest lessons that I ever received about creativity was in art school, and that was, as somebody that is creative and who makes or designs or whatever, you know, every day you get up and it's your job. So I am not a big fan of like waiting for the muse. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a wonderful, I believe it was a TED Talk. It started as a TED Talk and it became Big Magic, about the muse coming, and she kind of collected stories of different artists and writers talking about the muse and how they feel about it. And I am of the belief that you do not wait for the muse to strike, that you are constantly searching. You are constantly trying to bring the kind of muse to, well, not even the muse, you're trying to bring that spark to you. You're putting yourself out there to find the spark, and then so it's my job every day to find the spark and to feel creative. So Trouties, I have a feeling that I talked a lot longer than I meant to. I thank you so much for joining today and hearing about my inspiration process and how creativity works for me. If you are not familiar, I am Sierra Bailey. I don't know if this, I need to press that. I don't know if that affects it. I am Sierra Bailey. I am the owner, maker, designer, everythinger here at Manic Trout. You can follow along by pressing on that icon there on Facebook, and every Friday at 1 p.m. Central I go live. You can of course watch these videos not live. I comment any questions that you have anytime. I love to continue the conversation with you. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, at Manic Trout, and of course, everything is available at manictrout.com. Thank you again, Trouties. I love sharing the behind the scenes stories with you. Have a fabulous weekend, and I'll see you next week.